A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to another piece of Superfoam flying. And now, what I've got to showcase is another piece that pretty much requires one simple task before I get to ever review it. Getting it out of its box. This is the Evolve 100 from the Hyper lineup. Yeah, I've always called it the Keen lineup because Hyper has been a pre-existing thing in Nerf's history, dating back all the way to 2001. And being that this came out 20 years later, I'd say Hyper has just been expended at this point. But I will say that the Evolve 100 does seem like a blaster worth spending a big investment on. Compared to most of the other blasters, they aren't necessarily as expensive. But I can find the Evolve 100 being totally justifiable for a price tag of 60 bucks. I'm serious. Even with good prices and sales, you could probably get this thing for way more than I feel like that it probably deserves. But in any case, the Evolve 100, can it compare by any means to the likes of the Mach 100 or any other of the 100 blasters from this lineup? Well, time to go find out. But first, let's get it out of its packaging. To do so, we gotta have the right tools for the operation. Pro tip, cut away from yourself. And as I get this thing out, I can pretty much anticipate the Hyper line really is a terrible thing to do. When they brought back Rival, I feel like that they could have been considered obsolete, but man, were we wrong this whole time. So, there we go. Box is empty and all we got left are the inner components, which I might need to cut with a different tool. Another pro tip, utilize carrying scissors not by the grip as intended during use, but rather like this, especially when you're moving around, trying to hand them to somebody or whatnot. So, cardboard pieces that are reinforced with some packaging tape. Not very hard to cut through once you get it down just right. And well, that's one of them. Let's get to number 2. Well, with that is the Evolve 100 out of its packaging. And holy crap, this overall shape of it is kind of bizarre, actually. What's with this sort of triangular bit right up here at the front? It's just, I don't know, I feel like it could be dead space in a way, because this whole area here hardly serves a purpose other than the utilization of a tack rail in front of this hopper. And speaking of the hopper, it does have itself a unique sort of spring function like so. With this button here in the back that sits right behind the grip handle, you can easily open it up like so. It's spring action, so it can easily open and close itself up, like a trap door in a way. Then let's not forget the safety switch, which prevents the trigger from being pulled. Because these are blasters that can shoot at high FPS ranges compared to most other chronographs that have been showcased for other blasters from other lines. This line certainly is powerful in regards to how hard it can fire. And, unlike what we've seen before, it does have itself a grip in terms of priming. Wow, oh my gosh. What a draw that is. Now let's dry fire. Wow. Just from that feel alone, I feel like we might actually be on the right track. I don't really have a feel for this sort of weird triangular design that it has, and it's just very geometric in terms of its overall shape up in this end, but everything else is pretty much fine. And I do feel like the back end is seriously similar to what the Mach 100 had. So I feel like it could be a bit of a disappointment that they couldn't get a more original design put together for this, but Not that I'm complaining that much. I really do like the idea of utilizing a trapdoor system as a way to easily load the hopper up. Considering how large it is, you could definitely put in a lot of rounds very easily. And for the most part, what we're just going to do though is utilize the ammo that's included. Of course, another thing to keep in mind, gotta get your safety glasses. So, thank goodness they are once again incorporating the usage of safety by including these Z87 plastic glasses. So let's get them on right away. Well, here's the ammo that it all comes with. So, let's get it all out. Let's try to open it so that way it can all go into the hopper immediately. Let's see if we can, whoa. Let's open up the hopper like so. And, well, let's get these guys inside. So, wow, I guess it does serve its function rather well. I guess the one problem, though, that I've had with a lot of these blasters is that these type of rounds, which are just simply dubbed hyper rounds, nice, soft, ooh. This is a lot squishier than the original ones that they made. Definitely feels a little more solid in terms of its overall durability, but it definitely is a lot more squishier. From what I recall, the older ones were a bit more dense. But I guess Nerf decided to redesign them a little bit and make them a little less dense. Probably to help fix up the little problem that was there. Because priming the blaster and getting the rounds to go into the chamber was sort of a hassle at first. So I guess this is just their somewhat belated answer to try and counteract against the intense uproar that just came by. With this series supposedly trying to be a successor to Rival, I guess it's just no wonder why Nerf eventually decided to just lay off on these blasters. Well, looks like there's still a few rounds left I can get out here, so just try to bear with me here. Seems like a long, tedious process, but I guess the end result should very much be worth it. So, hopefully that's enough of the rustling around with all this tissue paper that it uses. And well, yet another case of a blaster that doesn't get loaded to its full capacity that it's capable of using. So, there's plenty of open space here. But you know what? It can easily be replenished, just like you probably would expect. And well, let's just see. How does this blaster perform? And I will say, other blasters that I've gotten to try out were not great. I mean, the Rush 40 wasn't a perfect start. The Siege 50 wasn't much of an improvement. The Mach 100 did seem to do well in some ways, but only so much. For this being another blaster in the series, let's just see. Does it stack up well? Well, I found some good pros on it and a couple of cons worth mentioning, but performance-wise, well, first round, success. Second, third, fourth, fifth, and one more. Well, would you look at that? Would you know anything at all about this? I guess not just from looking at the blaster. You'd have to get a hold of this yourself to know for sure, but from what I can already understand, this blaster is performing superbly in terms of how it chambers the rounds in properly compared to some of the other blasters I've had. And the way that it has a large capacity hopper with a unique sort of trapdoor design that springs open and closes itself automatically, it's a pretty handy innovation to have, especially if you want to quickly load in a hopper, unlike most of the other blasters, which you'd have to open a hatch. But this has its own spring-loaded trapdoor equipped. Then, of course, there's a tack rail up on the front, which can be handy for utilizing any additional canisters in case you want to use them. But we also can't forget about the one that's underneath, well, this. I would just call this a, well, I guess I can't really think of anything good here. It goes between the stock end and the grip right here. So whatever you call it, I suppose you probably have your own story about this and how it could be useful, but I've hardly found anything good about putting a tack rail on certain parts out there. It just seems like a weird choice, especially when there's so many others you can look at. Otherwise, I'm not seeing a whole lot of other things I can talk about with this. The Evolve 100 actually does seem like a solid, reasonable slice of hope for the lineup. And while I will say that the Fuel 20 did not do anything better for the line, the Evolve 100 is the exact opposite. I like this blaster. Yeah, it just seems like a reasonable thing for me to say at this point. I am starting to like this lineup. I mean, that has been pretty hard for me to say. I know I've been really judgmental on how the Mach 100 went, but it did pretty well in most ways. And considering that it had flaws of its own, I feel like every blaster at least has one notable con on it. Even the best ones I've handled, like the Eagle Point, Contractor, Ember Strike, Scavenger, and whatnot, they all have their own things to worry about. So whether I've ranked them on a top 10 list or whatnot, or even did Tears of the Clown, which has been pretty hard for me to put together, even from the get-go, but otherwise, I'm not seeing a whole lot of problems with it. So in that case, the Evolve 100 is a really good blaster. 100 rounds, utilization of more proper priming and chambering is a really big step up from what we've seen before that. The problems with chambering were just really bad, especially with the older blasters, but the Evolve, so far, is solid in terms of its chambering ability. But I guess the best part, spring-loaded hopper trapdoor. Able to quickly load in a hopper whenever necessary. So with that in mind, thank you very much for watching. My overall score in this blaster, 8.7 out of 10.1. Pretty awesome if you ask me. It certainly is a huge step up from what we've seen from the likes of many of the other blasters, but is it going to be the best blaster in the lineup? I can't be sure of that, not entirely at least. Until we figure out exactly what Nerf might be planning in the future, there's been plenty of other blasters that have come out since then. Like the Impulse 40, for example, which is pretty much little more than just a Rush 40 that has been slightly redesigned. So, not much to talk about that for the moment, but you will get to see videos of that in action. Secrets revealed by any means, distance gauge, aftershots, probably a lot more from here on out. So if you want to see more, go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.